Woo. Trying to find my way, 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 trying to find my way. I'm trying, change me.
My faith is in God alone, beyond a reasonable doubt. This brainstorm pouring rain on your season of drought. Just trying to lay a couple seeds in the mouth. Thanks for listening. You ever get the feeling you was missing it?
What up, y'all? It's your hometown hero, Scott Lane, the Black Bruce Wayne, a.k.a. the real Adam Coleman. So, you riding with Tru-ID. And, yeah, man, it's, cool to be back. 2019. Happy New Year's to y'all, man. I believe this is the first episode of the new year, man. And, we got a lot of things coming y'all way. Over the last couple of weeks, been doing a lot of interviews, so we got some interviews coming up for y'all, man. And, particularly in February, I'm going to be doing a good bit of traveling, in February, kind of like it was last year. I got a couple speaking engagements. Definitely looking forward to on a Super Bowl weekend. And then also going back to Chi-Town, like it was last year. Actually, Bloomington, Illinois, to kick it with my peoples out there at the unapologetically black and dang, I'm messing that up. But my man Tim Allison out there, I'm messing up the title of their event. But my man Tim Allison is bringing me out there, man, to be part of their series. And like I said, Super Bowl weekend, I'll be doing something with the King movement, actually. We're doing something called The Huddle. We're going to be down there at Morehouse College, and I'll be teaching on urban apologetics down there. So, definitely excited about those things coming up. That's definitely going to be dope. And just got off the phone with Chris a minute ago. And for y'all who don't know, man, I used to do gospel rap, back in the day. That's actually me on the intro, the intro song. I probably have said that before, but, my man Chris be sleeping on my skills, man. He swears I can't rap, yo. I've been telling this man for like 2 years, like I can really rap. Like I'm actually like pretty good, not trying to boost my head up or anything, but, I'm not garbage. You know what I'm saying? So he just told me that there might be a slot for me to drop a 16, you know what I'm saying, at this huddle here down in Morehouse College. So I might go ahead and write something and, drop a quick 16 or whatever. Hopefully I can record it. That'd be pretty dope, man. I've been trying to tell my man Chris, man, I got bars, man. They be sleeping on me, man. I got bars, bro. I got bars, but I guess I just have to go ahead and show and prove. So we'll see how that turns out. I keep you posted, but yeah, man. So when I'm out of town last year, it kind of caught me off guard. So, I didn't really have some episodes prepared. I kind of got off a little bit in February last year, but this time I'm ahead of the game. You know what I'm saying? I got some interviews that I've already recorded that I'll be able to drop in February so I can, stay on top of things. Got Dr. Michael Heiser coming up. I already interviewed him, just working on the audio from that. And a couple other guests that I'll just leave nameless for now. But, we got some folks coming up, man. So that's going to be pretty dope. But yeah, so, for now, we've been, been working our way through this series on social justice and, kind of coming down the home stretch a little bit. We've covered a lot of ground, I think. Started out some months ago, somewhat responding to, or I guess maybe, subsequent to maybe the statement on social justice that came out a couple months ago. And it's just been a conversation that has been swirling around just in general. So I kind of wanted to give my take on it, And, I try not to be reactionary about things. I try to, put out content that's, well thought out, not just kind of knee jerk rant type stuff, because I feel like that's just my role is to, take time with things and really chew on it. Because just with this show, I really want to, put together a body of work so that people can kind of, buffet style, comb through the episodes and glean some things that they can actually go out and use. So that's why, I kind of take my time with certain topics. And with this one, I'm actually about to take what I believe to be a necessary detour, right? I have to say that when I drafted out my notes for this series, I really struggled with honestly, whether or not I was going to include this particular episode, or at least large portions of it. Originally I was just going to leave it out because, Well, let me just go ahead and say it. I've always tried to maintain a sort of transparency and really have a conversation with my listeners through these podcast episodes, rather than just put a bunch of information out there. So, just showing all my cards here. Sometimes as a podcaster, it's just hard. It's just a hard balancing act between interest, niche, and need, I guess you could say, right? I mean, I've got a broad range of listeners who aren't all interested in the same things. For some folks, these kind of philosophy heavy episodes is just like podcast gold, man. They just eat it up. While for others, it's more like getting a root canal. You know what I'm saying? In the grand scheme of things, urban apologetics, or just the urban apologetics community, at least how we're seeing it now, is relatively young, and it just kind of find its way toward covering a broader scope of issues, right? And honestly, some of what I think needs to be addressed doesn't always line up with what people want. But I got to be, I got to be true to myself. I got to be true to myself and true to what my assignment is, and handle these things, the right way. For me, detail, attention to detail is just the name of the game. I got people hitting me up all the time, with questions, or, taking what I say and going out and applying it, right? As they engage folks with the gospel, which is what I'm really all about, But given all that, I really take it to be my responsibility to be a thorough and, trustworthy source of information, and to, cover issues so that folks can go out, use what they learn, here on the podcast, and then go use it, without getting hemmed up in a debate or a dialogue or whatever. That's why detail matters. I guess in a kind of way, I'm a music guy, so I guess I kind of feel like, the Jennifer Hudson of apologetics almost. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we all know Jennifer Hudson can sing, you know what I'm saying? But she's more of a ballad singer, rather than the kind of artist that's going to give you like that club banger. If you want somebody to, that bang in the club or, the pop charts, then you're probably not going to hit up J Hud. You might want to go with like Cardi B or something like that. I don't know. But if you just want a ballad or a body of work, with substance, then you can call J Hud. I mean, that's what she do, right? I guess what I'm saying is I wish all my episodes could be club bangers, just, real easy, quick listens, but, as I'm doing this, I'm just kind of, learning to get more comfortable in my own skin. I feel like my job is to just take really important or complex issues and just break them down in the clearest and simplest way, that I can, so that folks can, listen to the show and effectively put this information to use. Sometimes we, can camp out, some of the easier material. Sometimes we get into the deep end a little bit, but it all kind of works together, So that, that's just kind of where I'm at. This is kind of where I'm at. But I really did kind of grapple with whether or not to release this episode here. But actually, interesting. I just recently interviewed Dr. Michael Heiser, theologian, and I was actually kind of posing this to him to see what he thought about it. And he was like, "Man, just give him the truth. Give him as much detail. Give him as much depth. Don't sugarcoat nothing. Just give it to him straight." You know what I'm saying? He said he's actually had a lot of success with just being himself. And with complex material or not, don't spoon feed people. Give them the whole thing. So if I'm just just going in on this philosophy stuff and getting in deep, man, and blame Dr. Heiser, man, put it on him. It's his fault. So anyway, as I'm combing my way through this social justice conversation, to be honest, I really could have just highlighted a few points from the statement on social justice and the gospel that I disagree with or thought could have been worded differently, got some hate mail for it and, called it a day, but, I just think we can be more productive than that here. There's some opportunities to address some other things. I mean, apologetics at the end of the day, that's what I do. That's my angle on it. And, as I said in the last episode, the God is Good episode, there's a number of religious groups, ideologies, or whatever that are vying for attention in the Black community. Whether it be the Hebrew Israelites, Moors, Kemetics, atheists. What I think is a particular brand of atheism. I guess we can call it Black atheism. Et cetera. And they would contend that Christianity doesn't have what it takes to make sense of why the Black community has undergone the struggle that it has on up to the present, and also doesn't have what it takes to resolve these issues. Now, of course, I would actually say that the shoe is on the other foot. It seems, as I kind of been, studying it out, it seems evident to me that Hebrew Israelism, various forms of Islam, including, the kinds you would find in, Moorish Science, Atheism, and Kemetic Science, are actually the ones that are deficient in terms of providing a moral framework by which we can understand and overcome the challenges our community has faced and is facing. And I want to take a couple minutes to, demonstrate that. Now, why? Why am I doing that? Well, first of all, and I guess maybe this is just my petty side, but it just irks me to no end. When I come across people from these other worldviews who observe in-house contentions, within the body of Christ, within the church, particularly in this case with the whole social justice issue. And, we got folks out here, whether it be Hebrew Israelites, Kemetics, Black atheists or whatever, who will in vulture-like fashion use these in-house discussions as an occasion to draw people away from the gospel of Christ. Yes, right now there's some significant dialogues and debates being had along political and unfortunately, along racial lines in the church. But I guess, see, for me, and actually I'd say the vast majority of folks engaging in these sorts of discussions, at the end of the day, we may passionately disagree with one another, but we know that at the end of the day, we are one unified body, united under the bloodstained banner of Jesus Christ. So don't get it twisted. Y'all see disagreement and want to weigh in on it. And I'm like, bruh, pump the brakes, because for real, this whole discussion on social justice is a meaningful discussion to have when, dealing with the biblical worldview. But when we break down some of y'all worldviews don't even have the necessary components to provide a moral basis for social justice in the first place. If at all, certainly not in a way that's on par with the biblical and specifically the Christian worldview. So I'm just going to, take this episode and kind of get into all that just to, silence some of these naysayers out here. Just to say, just pump the brakes a little bit. You got to get on our level first, in terms of your moral framework before you can really have something meaningful to say to draw anybody away from anything or whatever. So, that's just what that is. So, but let me put it a little slightly different way. I guess maybe I put, more importantly, because I do want people to be able to engage folks with this information. And, the fact of the matter is, being an apologist isn't just about answering questions or objections. Often apologetics is most effective when you're taking the biblical worldview and helping people think through important or difficult issues, questions and whatnot, right? Especially when you can point out how the worldview that they hold falls short in a particular way, right? When critiquing a worldview, one of the ways that we can go about, doing that is evaluating how that worldview is able to answer or stand up in the face of life's most important questions. And if you can help somebody become aware of the shortcomings in their worldview and to think critically about them, then you can open the door to show how the biblical worldview solves the problem that their worldview isn't equipped to handle. Right. So, my listeners probably remember, that I talked about how worldview, basically the lens through which you see the world is kind of like a puzzle, and the puzzle pieces are like the sum total of all you believe to be true or real about the world. And, when you put them together, that's your worldview. Right. So, just as a reminder, in trying to break down the main components these worldviews consist of, I'll be using what I'm calling the MAKES model. MAKES is an acronym in which the M stands for metaphysics, right? Which has to do with getting to the bottom of, what exists and just reality itself. And, often deals with questions about, does a divine being exist? Is there a God? And if so, what is that God like? That's all under the category of metaphysics, right? The A stands for anthropology, which pertains to what the worldview has to say about who we humans are, why we're here, and so on. Then the K stands for knowledge. I probably won't spend too much time on that. The E stands for ethics or morality. We're kind of using those terms, ethics and morality, interchangeably. And then S, for salvation, which refers to not only salvation in the Christian sense, or even in a religious sense, but more so, how that worldview answers the human predicament, i.e., is there evil in the world, and what will be done about it, All right, so with that model laid out, let's break it down a little bit, right? So I've laid out the most important of our building blocks, from the biblical worldview, right? God Himself, that's our cornerstone building block, our foundation for objective morality, right? So now I'll be taking a look at atheism, Hebrew Israelism, a couple of different forms of Islam, specifically Islam in general, and actually some of the critiques that I'll be running through will apply to Moorish Science as well, which is within the conscious community, or one of the belief systems in the conscious community, rather, has a very heavy Islamic influence. And then also, Kemetic Science, we'll be addressing that as well. So atheists, Hebrew Israelites, Islam / Moorish Science, and Kemetics. We'll be dealing with those worldviews throughout the remainder of this episode. And, specifically what they have to say about God, and how what they have to say about God results in those worldviews being unfit to provide as solid of a moral framework and grounding for social justice as compared to the biblical worldview. So my argument is, basically, given that these worldviews are less capable in terms of providing a foundation for ethics, right, and engaging social justice issues are at bottom a moral matter, it's an ethical matter, that, when it comes to these other worldviews competing for the souls of Black folks, Christianity is to be preferred, and I say it stands heads and shoulders above these other worldviews, right? So, let's go ahead and start with atheism. There are different flavors of atheism, but broadly speaking, I'm mostly referring to, that classical atheism, taking the stance that there is no God, Now, we've seen that God affords us a plausible foundation for objective morality. But, what if you take God off the table? If there is no God, where do you look to for a foundation for morality? Right. Now, let's say you're going back and forth with, Black atheists, and they bring up, slavery. They say, white Christians enslaved, colonized, and raped their ancestors, and you're dishonoring your ancestors by adopting that slave master's religion. Okay. I'm sure most of my listeners have heard that. That's probably why you listen to this show, obviously. Now, there's some moral assumptions, being made here, namely that enslaving, colonizing, and raping folks is wrong, like really wrong, objectively wrong. Now, I wholeheartedly agree, that those behaviors are evil. And given what the biblical worldview has to say about God and how He intends for us to interact with one another, as a Christian, I can condemn chattel slavery and those abuses as evil, right? But I would want to ask the atheists, by what objective moral standard would you claim that these acts that you pointed out, enslavement, rape, colonization, if atheism is true, and you've taken God out of the picture, by what objective moral standard would you judge these things to be wrong, and then see how they answer that, a well-versed atheist, you could get different answers. And you can engage them from there. Now, if you subscribe to a harder, form of atheism like materialism, the view that only nature exists, the material world, then you're really going to have, I think, an impossible task, because you've got to find a way to ground these non-physical, objective moral values and duties in a natural world. It just seems to me that there's no successful way of doing that. And I'll just give a few reasons as to why I say that, along with some critiques that I think might apply to, even softer or broader forms of atheism. Okay. First of all, if you remember our convo from last episode, we talked about human worth, intrinsic personal human worth. And I want to revisit that first because it just seems to me that discussions on morality can't even get off the ground without a solid base of human worth to work from, right? Now, with that being said, one of the most natural ways in which you gain self-understanding is to look at, where we come from, right? Now, in a worldview that sees reality in strictly naturalistic terms, we're essentially just, matter, physical stuff that just happens to be arranged in a particular way. So what story, or I guess I could put it this way, what can the story of matter tell us about our moral values, duties, and specifically here, moral or personal worth, right? Just talking straight science for a second, right? If the standard cosmological model, the Big Bang theory or something like that is correct, then the universe had a beginning. Once upon a time, the universe, and by universe, I'm referring to matter, energy, time, and space, popped into existence from nothing, by nothing, and for nothing, and it'll eventually end up as nothing. But, that will, at least figuratively speaking, maybe we'll talk about that another time. But, somewhere along the line, the fundamental forces of nature get in the mix and allow for the creation of atoms, molecules, elements, stars, planets, and later on down the road, us, right? Now, in traveling back to the beginning, we see that in a godless universe, nothing is the mother of everything. Now, it should go without saying, that nothingness cannot have intentions. We talked about intentionality last episode, dealing with the connection between God and morality. But nothingness, just by definition of what nothingness is, can't have intentions. Intentions are the kind of thing that belongs to a person, right? If there is no God and everything comes, from nothingness, then there were no plans laid or purposes devised or moral values and duties intended for you and I as the universe came into being from nothing. And, for sure, nothingness can't bestow personal worth upon us either, right? Obviously, this is an account of our beginnings that is in sharp contrast to the biblical narrative. Now, in Genesis, we see that all things did not come from nothing or even something, but rather a someone. And that someone, Yahweh, intentionally formed mankind in his image and declared that we are good. So from the beginning, at least on the Christian view, Father God endowed man with this intrinsic moral worth. However, with Mother Nature, it isn't so. All that goes out the window. If everything came from nothing, then we humans are just a small part of a cosmic accident, kind of burped into existence. If atheism is true, then that's pretty much all we amount to. So gazing into the rear view mirror of our universe's history in search of personal worth, along with moral values and duties, is pretty much an empty pursuit. Our beginnings have nothing to offer us in this regard. We're just here. Even taking a step further, if we can't look to the origin of the natural world, define an objective foundation for personal value, is there anything about nature itself, that can account for it? Is there anything about nature itself that can, answer the question as to, what makes us human beings valuable? Where does the value come from? I think it's perfectly rational, to see yourself and see other human beings and assign value to them. But, what is the foundation there? What gives us the right to say that on a naturalistic account? Is there anything about nature itself that can give us that kind of a foundation? Right. I think the answer to that is no. And I say that for a few reasons. So again, we'll touch on personal worth kind of alongside, moral values and duties. But, let's look at it this way. Right. It's within the purview of the sciences to describe the natural world, as it is, and attempt to make predictions on how things will be. Right. We can conduct experiments on, all kind of stuff, make observations about how much something weighs, what it tastes like, how dense it is, how hot or cold it tends to be, all that kind of stuff, how maybe one form of matter interacts with another form of matter and so on. Right. But moral worth, that intrinsic personal worth, isn't a test tubable kind of a thing, is it? You know, it wouldn't make sense. For example, let's say that you put me, a dog, and a bottle of water in a lab, and ask a team of scientists to give us a readout on the amount of moral worth we each contain. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't really make sense. I mean, how would they even go about doing such a thing? What instrument, would they use to ascertain how many units of intrinsic values is floating around amongst the arrangement of atoms I call my body? Just kind of just a nonsensical question. What equation could a physicist draw up to describe how my moral worth interacts with the matter that I'm made of? You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to even ask a scientist to answer that kind of a question. Now, I'm sure those scientists could give us a nice breakdown of how hydrogen combines with oxygen atoms, and those simple forms of matter team up to make more complex material we refer to as water in that bottle of water. But in what way do the atoms I'm made of coagulate to form the immaterial stuff called moral worth? I think that might be a tough question for a scientist to answer. Maybe that sounds a bit silly, but I think it kind of illustrates the fundamental point. Moral values, duties, and worth are not natural features of physical matter. And in that sense, that's just a dead end and a no-go for naturalism in terms of being able to provide or account for, in physical terms, our personal moral worth. Now, let me just take a second and just kind of broaden the argument, broaden that argument a little bit to include moral duties and values. So, let's identify a key difference between natural facts and moral facts. Okay. And we got to bring two vocabulary words into the picture here right quick, and that's descriptive and prescriptive, right? Now, when we talk about natural facts are descriptive in that they have to do with describing things as they actually are. Like I've kind of alluded to, the sciences, broadly speaking, are, I would say, the best tools that we have for gaining knowledge, of nature. And by nature, I'm referring here to, that which can be encountered with the five senses and observed through scientific means, But as scientists, make observations, they can tell us about, really a lot about the physical world as it is, like I said, how much things weigh, maybe how fast they're moving, what things are made of, how different material things behave. For example, battery acid behaves in a very different way than water, right? And we can make observations about how they're different. The facts that we know about each of them serve to describe these substances as they actually are. And, that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about natural facts. They're descriptive. We can describe things, based upon those kinds of facts, right? But moral facts are something else entirely. There's something beyond nature about them. Moral facts are prescriptive. And by prescriptive, you're not talking about just, describing things in nature as they are, but rather making claims about things as they ought to be. What should you do or not do in any given situation? How should you treat others? What should be understood as good and what should be understood as evil? Those things have to do with, moral facts, and moral facts are prescriptive in that sense. Okay. So, I guess, going back to our example of, battery acid and water, right? Scientists can describe those materials as they are. But if a blind person comes up to you and says, they're dying of thirst, those descriptive natural facts, about just how those different materials behave can't tell you whether you should, give that blind person some water and save their life, or should you, give them battery acid and kill them? That's where moral facts come into the picture. They're prescriptive. They prescribe, things as they ought to be. Scientists can't tell you just on the physical makeup, whether you should or shouldn't use those substances for good or evil. That would be prescriptive. That's where moral facts come in. So, given that moral facts go beyond merely describing how things are and have to do with telling us how they ought to be, moral facts seem to be out of place in the natural world. And I'm not just saying that just because I'm a Christian and I want to, have some kind of religious monopoly over morality or something like that. Actually, many atheist philosophers would agree with me that finding moral facts in the natural world, you're pretty much out of luck. There just isn't any natural explanation for them. Just an example, a philosopher, an atheist, by the name of J.L. Mackie, has what he calls the argument from queerness. In his argument, he basically lays out that pretty much just what I said about the difference between descriptive natural facts and these prescriptive moral facts. He argues exactly how I did that, noting that these prescriptive facts are indeed out of place in the natural world. So if somebody wants to find a source for these prescriptive moral facts, then they're going to have to look to something supernatural to do it, something beyond nature, because natural facts just aren't like that. Natural facts describe things as they are. Moral facts describe how things should be. Totally different kinds of facts there, that the natural world just can't account for. Now, the atheist might want to say, well, that, hey, maybe moral values and duties seem like they aren't at home in the natural world, but, maybe it's evolution to the rescue. Maybe evolution has formed our DNA in such a way that we are compelled by DNA to be moral beings. Maybe that's the case, right? Now, it is true, that we do see altruistic behavior for the sake of the herd, so to speak, among different animals in the animal kingdom. We certainly do, whether it be baboons, lions, or, whatever it is. They kind of look out for the pack. But the evolutionary playbook, if you will, hasn't left us with guidelines as to who we should identify as being part of our herd and who we shouldn't. It certainly doesn't direct us to a species-wide conception of who we ought to consider as us and them. In my article on the Charlottesville riots, I guess about a year ago, I touched on the intersection between identity and morality, and I'm kind of appealing to that same, idea here. For folks who want to check out that series, I put it on the Free Thinking Ministries website. You can check that out. Maybe I'll put a link to it in the description. But, when you think about it, we each kind of find ourselves as being part of a number of herds, really, and evolution doesn't really kind of tell us which one we should value over the other. Right. I'm a Christian, I'm a Coleman, I'm an African-American, I'm an American, I'm a human, I'm a father, I'm a social worker, I'm a Virginian, I'm a number of different things, and nature does not impress upon me how I ought to prioritize the various aspects of who I am in defining what my herd is. Right. So just as an example, as an African-American, people of my herd are traditionally pro-Democrat, and the Democrat agenda is decidedly pro-abortion. As a human being that believes unborn children are also human beings, people of my herd may feel compelled to vote for Republicans who profess that they will end abortion. Now, obviously, they haven't followed through on that, but that's a whole another discussion, But, so, as a person, like myself, should I identify with the human herd and be at odds with my African-American herd, or align with my African-American herd at the expense of unborn members of my human herd? About a third of which, by the way, are children of African-American community. So the moral implications of who I decide to consider myself as being, my herd may be profound, but at the end of the day, nature has left it up to me. Evolution doesn't answer that question for me, And actually, furthermore, just to kind of add on another point, there's really no reason to think that nature forces me to value those of other herds as I do my own. Just think about how language is used to devalue people who belong to herds, different than our own. Like during wartime, for my military folks out there, it's common, for soldiers to develop slang terms as a subtle way of dehumanizing their enemies. And promoting a sense of otherness, whether it be commies, Japs, insurgents, and a host of other certainly worse terms that I could list. But, they develop these different terms as a way of kind of putting folks in a different herd than their own. Now my atheist friends might be arguing, against colonization, slavery, and so on. They're saying we should cast all that aside. Humanity is our herd, and our moral obligation to one another ought to be interpreted through that lens. But this is a very radical claim if the grounding for such altruism is the limited sort of herdism that we tend to find as the moral code of choice among creatures less evolved than ourselves. Evolution just doesn't help us here. There's no good reason given evolution to think that, this humanity-wide altruism is impressed upon us by evolution. There's just no evidence to suggest that, So given that, I don't see how you could find a grounding for this kind of robust sense of morality from evolution. I just don't see it, So again, looking back at the origins of humanity, if atheism is true and we come from nothingness, we don't see a good grounding for moral worth there, or values and duties for that matter. It doesn't seem that moral worth, values, and duties are a part of nature itself. There's no good reason to think that. It's certainly not a natural fact or a feature of physical reality. There's no reason to think that it is. So we're kind of at a dead end there, in terms of looking at nature to be a foundation for these kinds of things. And then, evolution didn't help us out either. Even if we are, wired by Mother Nature hasn't wired us in a way that would suggest that it certainly is the case, that we find this altruism and base of morality that extends to the whole human family. If anything, we could say that there might be a kind of a herd morality, but that would be a very limited morality. It wouldn't be the kind of morality that would substantiate, say, for example, like Black Lives Matter claims, where they're claiming that everybody needs to respect, the dignity of Black folks and that kind of thing, the life value of Black people. Well, I mean, if atheism is true and we're programmed by evolution, then, why should people of other herds consider Black lives, or any lives for that matter, other than their own, to be of value? Why not just value their own herd, just like a tribe of baboons might, or something like that, or, that they might value their herd and not really care about, another, group of baboons who, whether they survive or not. You know what I'm saying? So if the atheist is looking to nature, and hoping that evolution can save the day, in terms of providing some sort of moral foundation, seems to me they've come up short once again. Nature just can't carry that load, man. I'd have to agree with J.L. Mackie that moral facts are just out of place in a naturalistic framework. Now, I do want to acknowledge, just for the sake of being careful, I do want to acknowledge that there are a number of different perspectives that atheists hold in terms of attempts to ground objective moral values without God. This is not like an open and shut kind of a topic. There's lots of literature written on it. There's lots of valuable things to read on the subject. For example, I mean, I know some atheists would hold to what they call moral Platonism. Which is that these, moral values and duties exist in some kind of non-physical realm, kind of in the same way the numbers, exist. They say that these moral facts and, moral facts about values and duties exist. And, maybe in the description of the show, I'll kind of post a link as to, why I think that just doesn't really work. I mean, given it's just not clear to me how you can establish, moral duties, certainly, on moral Platonism, because even if it is the case that the moral values are floating out there somewhere, I don't see why that would mean that we have moral duties or some sort of obligation to align with those values. And then you also have, what we can call like an interaction problem between what philosophers refer to as abstracts and concrete objects, as well as so I'll just kind of leave that there for now. Along with some other things, it just, I don't see moral Platonism as being a viable option. Then some people believe that, I guess maybe a different attempt. Some people believe that humans can, base morality on pure reason alone, and that's a whole different discussion. I actually do believe that our ability to reason can point us to moral truths. I mean, obviously that's just, Romans chapter 1 and 2. It kind of deals with the Imago Dei. But, while reason can help us to spot moral truths, I see no grounds to think that reason alone is the basis for morality, as a grounding, particularly in terms of moral duties. I don't really see it. But anyways, for reasons like these, it just seems to me that atheism cannot provide a solid foundation for moral values, duties, and personal worth. So as I look at Black history and just the struggles there and where we are now and how do I interpret my ethical duty to my community and society in the face of injustice today, or, just going back to our example, say for the atheists who bring up slavery, colonization and all that. I mean, I'd say, any thoughtful person might, wrestle with things like that in terms of understanding the human experience. But unlike the biblical worldview, which provides a plausible, solid foundation for morality and social justice, atheism simply just doesn't have the moral resources within it, within that sort of ideology or framework to navigate these kinds of issues without making assumptions about morality that their worldview just can't sustain successfully. So that's why, it seems to me that atheism is not a viable option for somebody who really does care about the community, really does, and really is concerned about the kinds of things that are being tossed around here in the social justice discussion. So that's atheism. I do think that Black atheism is on the rise. Seems to me anyway. It's not quite as taboo as I guess as it used to be. But still, for the most part, Black folks believe in God. One way or the other. I mean, like even the most hardcore anti-Christian, person you encounter in the conscious community, for example. I mean, they'll make statements like, "Oh no, I believe in God." They're just not really trying to rock with the Christian God. Usually they'll lean towards some or hold to some other form of theism, some other type of God or something like that. So, for the remainder of this episode, and actually we'll probably have to bleed into a whole other episode, lest we, get too long here. We'll talk about some of these other ideologies, right? And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and camp out right there for right now. I'm saying we've actually covered a whole lot of content already, man. I intended for this to be one episode, but I think we're going to go ahead and camp out there. We just addressed atheism and taking a look at, why I don't think morality, moral values, duties and moral worth can be grounded in the natural world. And even if we take, a broader look at atheism, I just don't see that worldview as being a viable option, in terms of grounding morality and, thus grounding, being a foundation rather for social justice. So I'm gonna camp out right there, man. And in the next episode, we're gonna be taking a look at Hebrew Israelism, Islam, and the Kemetic tradition. You know what I'm saying? And even in covering Islam, we're going to be, kind of taking a side swipe at Moorish Science as well, But just looking at those different worldviews, seeing how they stack up, in comparison to the Christian worldview. And my conclusion is that they can't provide as solid of a framework for morality and ethics and social justice as we find in the biblical worldview. So with that being said, man, love you guys. And, definitely check us out on iTunes, YouTube, Podbean, patreon.com/Adam Coleman, everywhere that I'm on the internet, man, Facebook, Twitter, the whole nine. And as always, man, love y'all. It's another episode in the books. Peace.